Hey guys, this is Velde from Moji here. Danish Counter-Strike is one hell of a drug, but so is Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and I'm joined by Rosh here, who is a major champion. Listen, anytime you're from North America, you can say that's pretty fucking badass. We're obviously going to talk about his whole career, a lot of interesting things. So one of the things, Rush, I thought was quite interesting is, whereas a lot of the people who came up in the NA scene, actually a lot of them, because of the way things happened with like all the iBuy Power, people getting banned and stuff like that, and some of the big, like, you know, it was mainly the League of Legends orgs that came in that kind of pumped up the NA scene. A lot of people actually, like most people know their story, you know, they rose to the top pretty quickly. One thing I was surprised when I went back and looked at is I could remember when you were in teams like, obviously, Elevate, and then I could remember the Conquest period, but I actually didn't realise like you were actually like 19, 20 around the time you even got to the invite level. So you're some like young pop necessarily. In fact, I even saw when I went back that in like the early Elevate lineup, one of the first lineups, it wasn't even some of the other players we'll talk about later, like ELEAGUE and stuff. It was basically just you and all the 1.6 veterans. It was like XP3, Warden, Storm, like people are going to know if they followed 1.6. So how did you end up in this team? Because like I say, you were like a 19, 20-year-old. You weren't necessarily like the 16-year-old sort of like prodigy people talk about. And you with all these like, essentially some of them are kind of like washed up players that time. So what was this period of your career like?
I think it's because I started playing Counter-Strike later than most. Like, obviously, I always played it like casually, but in terms of like playing it at a competitive level or on ESCA and teams, I didn't start doing that till I was literally 18, like in college, because I didn't realize there was a scene for it. I just played for fun. And when I realized there was a scene for it, I'd already been playing Counter-Strike for many years. And then after like, sifting through the early ranks of Open, Intermediate, and Main, after I got noticed, like Warden asked me to join his team initially. I forget what team it was. I think it was called the United Five back then.
Yes.
And I got an offer for that team, and for whatever reason, I said no because I was on this team with if you remember Mospec, TCK, Frost. It was like some main team called Homeless, and I really like playing those guys.
And
But
those
they're
are
like,
all, if people don't know, those are all like people from Source and stuff, like legit players, right?
yeah, and I really like playing with those guys, but they called me really ignorant and dumb for not taking that offer because it was an invite team, so I'd be able to go to LANs and stuff. I'm like, no, I like playing with the guys. I'm like, whatever. So I lost that offer. I ended up playing in main teams for another season or two, and then I got the offer again. I forget when exactly that was, but at that point, I'm like, all right, now it's time because I hadn't been doing anything with this main team. And yeah, everyone on the team was pretty much like a seasoned veteran. I was the only young guy. It was like Volcano, XP3, Storm, and Warden, and me. So it was very interesting. I was like the hard entry fragger. I was supposed to carry them, and we actually always brought the invite teams close, but we never really got over the edge because we just lacked that firepower. And it was only until we got ELEAGE and Roca that we actually started doing things because they were insane back then. Roca and ELEAGE. That was when John was first coming up in the scene, and we started beating most teams. But once again, we were like on the cusp, but not quite there.
Yes. I actually wanted to ask about those two players because, as you say, the first Elevate you were in was this like all veteran one, and you're the young guy. Then the next one was basically the crop of like all the other up and coming players. And the funny detail, you referenced two players there I want to ask about. So obviously, ELEAGE now, I mean, most people probably have him as like the best NA player ever. Like he's kind of like his status is it's very well known, and he's pretty decorated as like a very consistent player. Blah blah blah. But here's what people wouldn't realize: back then there was like a bit of hype for him. It was actually Roca that had all the hype back then. I remember people thought he was like some aim monster who's going to be some amazing. Obviously, he didn't make it, right? They're the contrast. What would you say these two players are like so early on in their career? Like, for example, could you actually see that, like, I know everyone always claims they do, but could you see sort of like the beginnings of what would become a great player in ELEAGUE? Did he have any qualities that kind of hinted at that? And what about Roca? Like, why did it never work with this guy? He just seemed to flame out completely.
I think back then, Roca had more raw talent than him and more raw skill, and that's why he always got looked at. And he had a lot of flashy plays. But I think that John was, or ELEAGE, he had such a complete player mindset. Like, he was always trying to learn each game. Not that Roca wasn't, but Roca was more into, like, having flashy plays. And he was kind of a player that he had a hard time communicating as he was playing, which is, like, it's a very important thing to do because you have to kind of multitask as a pro player. And ELEAGE was kind of like an all-around player. Like, he could do anything, really. And the only, like, downside was he has this really, really high sense back then. So he was kind of like, it was strange because no one else did that. But, I mean, it worked for him. But I do think back then he was definitely one of the most talented players I played with, even back then when he was only playing for a year or so. So I think it was an under the radar player, and obviously he showed that he was an all around player and is a world class player to this day. So, and in terms of Roca, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he lost like a fire or stopped competing. I know he plays Valorant now, I'm pretty sure, but I think just him lacking a lot of mainly the communication, I think, in my opinion, and that's kind of what held him back.
Right, after this period, you had another team where it was like basically the players who had been in Team Liquid, the first squad, the former Denial players, made the Conquest squad with you. And this is where you hook up with a bunch of people that obviously everyone knows now, daps, stanislaw, but there was like Shazam was there, etc. Right, what's weird about this team, obviously Naf, but he was super fucking young at the time. When you made this team, I remember this was the team where it was actually at one of the CVOs I was at, where you actually placed top 4 at a tournament ahead of like, I think it was Dignitas actually. I think it was like MSL and Pimp's Dignitas team. So like an international squad at the time. Right, this team on paper, that lineup doesn't make any sense to a modern fan, dude, because you've got daps and Stanislaw in the same team at the same time, and then you've got this like weird like Shazam still there after the whole Cloud9 period. Like, what was this particular period like in time? One thing I'll notice about this part of your career, by the way, is like I say, you were never the guy who just like had the good tournament and fast tracked right to the top. You always had to go like step by step by step, and it's usually like, you know, you met 1 or 2 people, you go with that 1 or 2 people to the next team, and you kind of climb gradually. Did you actually have a sense as you were going through the scene as to what your path was going to be to the top, or how you, if you were in fact going to be a top player?
Honestly, I think I got to the invite level in North America really fast. Like, I think within this first 6 months of playing Counter-Strike professionally, like in North America, or playing it all actually, I got the invite. So that was I don't know if you remember Monomaniac Esports with like Juvenile, TM, Kiko, and Arya. That was the team I was on. We went to Invite LAN. My first LAN ever was an ESEA Invite LAN. Like, I didn't go to any local LANs. So like, I had played for 6 months and I got to that team, and then that's when I had the down spiral with like main and going back to invite. But with the Conquest, I don't know, this team was basically a team of misfits, teammates who didn't make it in their previous teams, and they all kind of banded together and made this team, and we all had a lot of raw skill, but there was also a lot of problems in that team, like mentality, communication wise. Like, we had RYX and Shazam, and that was one of the most volatile rosters I'd ever been on. There was some huge blow-ups between those guys, and honestly, it all stemmed from RYX. That guy was kind of wild. I don't know what was wrong with that guy, and he was cool outside of practice and outside of the game, like in person, but sometimes in matches he just was a completely different player, and that's why that kind of changed it out and got Stanislaw, and that's when it became the team that became OpTic, you know. So, and in terms of your question about the trajectory of my team or my career, I do think I felt like every time I went to a different team, I got better and better, like in terms of like the rankings and like my experience. Like, I never thought like I had a real big downswing from that point, like from the Elevate point until basically Cloud9. I feel like it was always like a trajectory. There was like some obviously downswings in it, like a roller coaster would be, but I feel like in general, it was always an upward trend for me at that point in my career.
One of the interesting things is when you guys, that core obviously then became the OpTic team, as you say, right? That was a big deal, because if people don't know, as I alluded to earlier, where like, for me, there's like, if you do like generations in CSGO and NA, like the first generation is where it was just basically like the core that was Cloud9 and core that was iBuyPower. It was like those two teams basically. Then you have, like I say, like the League of Legends teams come in, Team Liquid, all these squads come in and make teams, you know. And then for me, it's this era when like the core dogs came in. So people remember FaZe Clan came in and OpTic came in. But the thing that's different about that is the League of Legends teams really did just go, right, who's the best NA team? We'll get them. And some of them didn't even seem like they necessarily, like, some of them cared if they were really good. Some of them just wanted a team in CSGO, it looked like. The COD dogs, the thing is, if you look at, especially obviously FaZe Clan is famous for spending a lot of money, but OpTic is a team where if people don't know COD, this is supposed to also be a team that's like based on competitive success. Like, OpTic isn't just supposed to be popular, it's supposed to be like the best, as obviously in Call of Duty, in any like game they play basically. And I know their fan base is not only like rabid for that, but the owner Hex at the time, like, it's kind of like his persona. It's the idea that, like, you know, I build like championship squads, or like he was even using that whole like sort of like trust the process meme, if you remember, with this team. So when they came into this team, the initial squad you had before you got to having all the like the amazing lineup later that won ELEAGUE, etc., was this initial squad, was there actually like pressure put up on you when you came to the squad? Like, did you basically get told like you're supposed to become like, did you have goals set? Feel like you have to make the major, or you have to become champions, or what was the vibe in that sense?
Believe it or not, the pressure from the org, and especially Hex, was non-existent. Like, the guy was the nicest person I've ever worked with by far. Like, he wasn't even a boss; he was a friend, literally to this day. And I think I attribute a lot of our successes because we didn't have that pressure from him or the org. There was like the looming pressure because the COD team was #1, the Halo team was #1, the Gears of War team were #1 in the world. So there was this looming pressure that we kind of have these expectations to live up to, but it was never said or pushed on us at all by the org. The only time it was ever like felt was maybe by the fans, and only at certain times. I actually still think the OpTic fans were some of the best I ever dealt with, because even in our down times, they were always behind us and always wanted us to do well. And even to this day, I still have OpTic fans in my mentions all the time saying like, "Oh, that was such a great team," and I think at the beginning it was really hard because we didn't have very good results when we had Shazam, I think. And yes, we started at the upward trend when we had Mixwell. When we got Mixwell, we just started getting better instantly. And the big, obviously, changes when we got rid of Damien for Stanislaw. Yes. As I love Damien, but like that was the best change also. But those two changes, because both times we made those changes, we got a huge like upswing in results and consistency and everything. But in terms of pressure, honestly, I didn't feel it. And the only thing that Hex ever said was like, if you're not winning, you better be doing content, which a lot of us didn't do because they're a content org. And if you're not winning, then what are you doing at that point, right? I think like very little people in that team streamed or did YouTube, so we were all focused on winning, and thank God we did. But I do know that Hex is very appreciative when people do content if you're not actually like getting results. So.
Yeah, one thing I want to ask is, before we go on to like the actual real success that OpTic did have, is like I say, when you made these first lineups, like actually if I'd looked at those teams on paper, like you were saying there, like the Core Dogs #1, like basically every game they were in, they were #1 OpTic. If I was like being brutal, I would have said like, mate, you got to be realistic and CSGO. Like, there's no way this lineup's going to be #1. Like I know only by the end of the year you'd won the ELEAGUE and stuff, but like at the time it just seemed like that was like an impossible dream further away. Like basically, did you actually have any sense at this point in your career, before people like Stanislaw, Tarik came into was it even a dream? Was it a belief that you could ever be #1 or win big tournaments? Like, I know, I always wondered, like, did NA players themselves have like mentality of like, we're supposed to be second best and the best, like whatever, Swedish or Europe, like we're not supposed to win the tournaments? Did you actually have like a confidence like that?
In order to get that confidence, you kind of have to have like a taste for it. Like you need to like bring a team close or like make a deep run in a tournament. And we had a few moments like that. Maybe not versus the best team in the world, but like you said, at the CEVO LAN, which obviously is a very small LAN in comparison to the big ones, but we beat Dignitas, and then we actually brought Mousebirds when they had Nico to 3 maps, and it was really close. And we could have even like, I thought we were gonna win that event, and that was the first time I actually felt like, wow, we can actually do big things. Obviously, that's what it's been rostered, but from that point forward, I knew that we had a lot of chances internationally, and we actually always played better versus Europeans than we did versus Americans. American, it's always hard because you play versus the same teams over and over to the point where like you know what each other are going to do. It's more of a mind game of how to play the opponent, because you play each other so many times in scrims and so many times in matches. So when you go to Europe, you get a fresh look, at a new team, and they don't know what you're doing necessarily. But I never actually got the sense of like, oh, I'm just gonna like compete in North America and just do my thing. I always wanted to be the best that I could be, and I think like I said, it was only like an upward trend ever since I joined Conquest.
Right, when you got Mixwell to join the team, that, as you pointed out, was kind of the first real legit signing that really put the team upwards in trajectory, because he was clearly like, listen, if people don't know, it was a gamble. Like, he wasn't like some superstar player in Europe. He was playing the fucking Spanish team. But if you ever watched him with the eye test, he clearly had skills. Like, the guy had skills in his game. But the thing I wanted to ask about was this. If people look at the history of European players going to North America, first of all, it's not very large, actually. A lot of them, sadly, have said no to the offers over the years. And then the rare times they have, and I'm talking about legit ones, as in you don't just stay in Europe and play in the land. You actually have to move there like this and live in North America. A lot of them also don't tend to work out for factors like, cultural difference. Maybe they can't handle like everyone screaming in comms, or just like they miss home and, they just immediately sort of get bummed out. I mean, this basically happened in some of those Cloud9 lineups later on when they got all the European players. How did this one work out though? Because I have to say, I know Mixwell as a personality. He can be a bit quiet, he certainly seems like later in his career he did miss being at home. How did this first year work out though? Because obviously it was a fantastic signing for this team and it was like very influential to the success of the squad. So was there something different about the vibe when he came over? Did he actually just fit in? What was it like when he came to this team? And did you actually know basically how good he was supposed to be? Yeah,
we definitely did a lot of research on him before we picked him up. I forget we were looking at other players like Hunter, for example. He was completely unknown at the time. But we asked Pitar, I forget his last name. He's the owner of HLTV, one of the owners.
Oh, right, yes.
Yeah, he always gives us like scouting lists of like unknowns that people don't know about that we can get. And at that time, Mixwell was at the top of that list. So we watched his demos and we're like, this guy's insane. So we just picked him up fully. And the first thing I noticed is his English is really not so good, which is a given because he has lived in Spain his whole life. But he honestly learned English really fast. Like he became fluent, basically like fully fluent within like a couple months. just by playing in practices and FPLs and at rank S. But one thing that really changed a lot was when he came, he brought like a European mentality, because we actually had really bad like practice routines and we were kind of lazy at the time because I don't know, just it's I guess maybe the North American mentality. But he was like, he instantly said like, "This is how you guys always practice, or is this like the mentality you always have when you lose?" Like all these things that we didn't really look at, and that third party perspective that we brought from Europe, it really changed a lot in our mentalities, because we had some issues with being like down when we'd lose. And he was really good at actually like pointing that out, like, we can't do that. You have to like maintain a good mentality, and we have to practice 6 days a week or whatever it was. And all that stuff, I think, really elevated us a lot in game. And on top of that, his actual in-game like performance, he was kind of like a no fucks given. Like he just did whatever he wanted. He was just off the leash, and we didn't have much of a system in OpTic. It was more of like a defaulty do what you want type of thing, kind of like a budget Fnatic version. You know how Fnatic kind of sends the guys out, the troops out, and they do what they want. I'm talking about old school like 2015 Fnatic. And we kind of played like that in OpTic, and it really worked out because we had a lot of high skilled individual players, and bringing Mixwell kind of elevated that to the next level because he was just so raw skilled and didn't care. And he was like so confident in North America because he was in Europe playing against European teams all the time. And he comes to North America and he can just slay everyone, you know?
Right, one of the interesting things, obviously, that again progressed your career was in OpTic, you got to qualify for the majors now. You got to play like ESL Cologne, for example, right? As someone who, you already, as we talked about in this interview, you've been playing against top European teams previously, you had international experience, but like, what's different about when you go to a major for the first time?
I mean, like you said, like you've been dreaming of your whole career since you started playing to be there, to be in that stage. So even if you're playing a team that you might have beat before, it's completely different because the stakes are at the highest they've ever been, and you never experienced that before. So it's basically a make or break. And in our first major in ESL Cologne, in our first qualifier we made it through. Was it 3-2 at the? It was ESL Cologne 2016. So we beat, I forgot who it was, like Hellraisers. It was like all like CS teams, like not Gambit. Who was it called? Fluffy Gangsters, Gambit, and like Hellraisers, and flip side of the teams we beat. So it was like,
it really was all CIS.
All CIS teams, yeah.
Right.
And I remember like I say in interviews all the time that one of the most nerve-wracking and crazy moments of my career, even besides the Boston Major, I think it might be number one of like in terms of like feels, was when I qualified for my first major, not even at the majors, because you're striving to get to that point. You're striving to get that sticker that your name imprinted in the game. And when I got that, I literally like had like tingles in the last round. Like I was like just like vibrating with emotions, and it was like, even though obviously the major win was an intense feeling in front of a crowd, you can't compare it to anything else in the world. That feeling was actually more intense when I made it the first major, believe it or not, which is crazy to think about.
So obviously one of the big moves, it wasn't actually that much longer after this major, was when Tarik came to the team, who'd previously been obviously in CLG for a number of years at that point in time. Right? If people don't remember, at that point in time, because CLG, the team, had sort of like really gone downhill over the year, they'd become kind of a joke. In fact, if people don't remember, just before Tarik left, there was almost some sort of like weird thing publicly where he sort of implied he was like trapped in his contract or something. Yeah. So it sounded at the time like he wasn't in a great headspace. But when he came to your team, he was pretty much like really good form immediately. I remember like the team immediately was just better. Like obviously you played with him for a number of years and in different teams after this. Who is Tarik the player, and what is he like as a teammate?
He's very selfless. He also puts a lot of time in. Like you said, he was really good initially because even though he wasn't on a team and stuff, I'm pretty sure he was just grinding the game nonstop because that's what he does. Like even now, even though he streams it, like he pretty much plays CS, Valorant all day. He's a gamer, so he's always gonna grind. But in terms of a teammate, he's very selfless, good communication, talks mid-round. He was never gonna be toxic. Like I can think of maybe one, if that, instance where he was like maybe a bad teammate, not a bad teammate, like toxic. But even then, it wasn't even. I don't even think it was that bad. Like so, when you have a team like that, and you play with him for 4 years or 3 years or whatever it is, then he never ever shows a bad side to him in game. That's pretty hard to come by, I think, these days, because out of all my teammates, like I can always name 1 or 2 moments where like, yeah, he kind of like got a little out of hand there, but Tarik literally never. Like he was just such a great teammate in that sense.
Because then we come to this dreaded roster move, right? Which actually turned out to be cursed as fuck. Because obviously it's what happened for like two more times at least in CSGO, which goes like this: Tarik joins the daps team. Daps quickly leaves. Stanislaw becomes the IGL. We've literally seen it play out a bunch of times now. The joke is we just need fucking daps to make us all the IGL of EG now. We can do it a third time, can't we? Right?
I mean, they're doing it right, so yeah.
I know. Basically, I want to ask you basically from behind the scenes, like what happened with this move? Because I remember actually very specifically. I have mind for details like this, mate. I remember what actually everyone else thinks the story went like this. You know, Stanislaw became the IGL, and then you just went on. No, what happened was, initially, Tarik joined. It was actually initially, I remember that Stanislaw was the one who was, I think, benched. Daps was the IGL. I think he went to like Northern Arena or some LAN or something. And then right afterwards, it was the other way around. Then it was like, right, Daps is actually out. Stanislaw's back in. He's the IGL. Like, what is it? What is the dynamic between those two? Like, I mean, obviously you guys played together previously in past teams. Like, why was this move made? What was, and why the indecision initially if you were going to do the move?
I mean, what's done is done. So no matter what I say, like, people get upset about it.
Sure.
Whatever. But like, literally, like, what happened was, so we initially wanted to replace Stanislaw because I think there were some attitude issues, and him and Naf didn't really get along that well. So I thought it was the best choice. And after 1 week of playing, it honestly stemmed from Tarik, because Tarik just said like, "Is this how you guys always play?" or something that's planted a seed, you know, like after like the first couple practices,
Right.
He's like, and then he's like, he knew Stanislaw had a different style of calling, and I think he preferred that. So he kind of like started like the rumblings of like, "Hey, I think we would be way better with Stanislaw opposed to daps." And I'm honestly like, I agreed with him, like, and we all talked to the team like, yeah, actually it might be the right choice. After we had played like a week of practice and we talked about it thoroughly, like, yeah, we fucked up and this is really like not cool to do to daps, because like he like thinks he's settled in a new team with a new roster and it's fresh, but we thought like this is best to like rip the band-aid off now than do it in like a month. So we're just gonna do it now, get it over with. The community is gonna be confused, daps gonna be pissed, but it has to be done, you know. And it was one of the hardest decisions we had ever made, because we had to tell Daps that he was like, you know, basically cut from the roster, and he'd been with us from the beginning of Conquest. God, I don't know, a year and a half, whatever it was ago. So it was really one of the hardest things I'd ever done in any team. Like, I got really emotional about it and everything. And after that, though, we did end up becoming better. So as much as it sucked to do, it was honestly the best choice we could have made at the moment.
How would you explain the DAPS side of the equation then? Because the same thing happens, like I say, in all of his teams. It's just at different levels of scale. Like, for example, in the NRG team, the difference is, instead of just being a good NA team, it was actually genuinely was one of the best teams in the world. It just got stuck at the semi-finals, didn't it? Right? Why do you think it is in his career? He reminds me actually a little bit of, like, I always say he's like an NA version of MSL. Because it's like, if you just give these guys like a bunch of average players, they'll actually immediately get a team up and running. Like, they'll have a system, they'll have all the roles sorted, they'll gradually get better, but there's a, you know, they sort of just haven't been able to make that last step up and like win the big trophies. Generally, I'm talking about, you know, like often people, you know, go to their level, then go to another team. Like, what is the, like, from your perspective, what's held Daps back? Like, why has he gotten to these positions where either his teammates like lose confidence in him or he just can't get past that point? How would you speculate on it?
I do think he might be stuck in his ways of calling, for one. Not that it's like a terrible way, but he kind of has a comfort zone of calling. And over time, if you keep calling that way, the meta shifts a lot and teams kind of adapt to how you play. That's one of them. And I also think like this day, to be brutally honest, this day in CS, you need to be individually skilled, and like, everyone on the team has to be at the top of the game. All 5 players, not just 4. I think it's part of the reason I got replaced, because I was kind of lacking individually. And I do think that you need to be at the top of CS, to be in the top 5, top 10 consistently. Everyone has to pull their weight. And obviously, Daps didn't pull his weight all the time, and that's probably one of the reasons why the teams, like when they're in a downswing or in a slump, they go to the stat board and they're like, what do we do? Like, and they think about, oh man, we've been playing the same for a while. Daps isn't playing that well. Maybe it's time to, you know, give another look. That's probably what keeps happening. So he keeps getting scapegoated. But I do think, like I said, in this day and age, I think everyone has to pull weight, myself included. I think me getting replaced in the complexity, this is not to pertain to the conversation, but me getting replaced in complexity was kind of like, it was probably the right time, because I don't think I was pulling my weight fully. And I do think that if they had someone that could anchor better or pull the weight more, then they'd probably perform better. So to parallel that to Daps, I think that maybe Daps, in the same sense, realized that maybe he could have pulled his weight too sometimes, and that it might have been for the best in those moments.
Fair enough. Right, when you actually got this lineup where you actually had integrated some of these players like I was talking about, a big tournament actually on the road to the ELEAGUE Championship was winning this Northern Arena LAN, because this was the tournament where you beat the G2 team, which people don't remember was a very good team. It was always Shocks and Scream, who were like top players in the world, you know, and also it was a team where it's just like, these are all like super experienced players. These are all like people who've been in majors and stuff. So even though it, you know, as a LAN, it's never going to be as prestigious as a massive one. You know, these are good teams. There's a quality set of was it meaningful to win a tournament like that?
Oh, it was awesome. I think I might have been the first tournament we won, or maybe the minor was the first tournament if you count that, the MLG minor or something, one of the minors. But yeah, it was incredible, because you know, G2 is a team that probably came to this event like, oh, let's get invited. There's no good teams. Let's win this easy 50K, you know. And they just end up losing to us. They're like, what just happened, probably? And for us, it was a huge confidence boost because we realized like we've been working for this type of win for so long now, and it's versus a really good team on LAN. So I think from that point on, that was like October or September of that year, maybe early on in the year before we made our decent runs. And from then we kind of like pushed ourselves to like different levels. And you know, it's funny. Like side note, we never got paid for that event ever. So
there we go.
We tried so many times, but like apparently they like got a different like ownership. So when they switched ownerships, they didn't have like any of the contracts to like pay people out. So like it was out of their hands. And yeah, after 5 years, haven't got that 10K.
Right.
It is
after this. One thing I want to bring up, right, and I won't lie, I'm sort of doing this as well to give, like, because it is real context, but also it makes me look better. Because first things first, I'll put my cards on the table in case people don't remember. I did pick against OpTic every single playoff series of the ELEAGUE Season 2 playoffs. Like, so I was wrong 3 times in a row. But I will say this one piece of detail that is real, which is what people do forget, though, Rosh, is in that tournament, right, the way ELEAGUE worked was unusual, right? Because since it was so long, the actual playoffs and the group stage, actually, like, people could travel to other tournaments between. And you guys went to Sweden and you went to Dreamhack Winter. You actually came last place just before the playoffs.
We got dominated,
Where was this team at the moment? Like, was it, like, listen, to be fair, that is like, you know, you travel all the way to Sweden. It's like it's in your back door and you come back to America for an ELEAGUE. Like, how would you explain this? Like, how does a team go from last place at, like, let's be real, like a tier 2 LAN in theory, to first place at a massive tier 1 LAN, you know, like a week later or something? How does this happen?
So the group stage was before Dreamhack Winter, and we actually beat some decent teams. We had beat Fnatic, but they were playing with their coach Jumpy at the time, but they still had Olaf, Crims, all those good guys. So they were at down a man, but we beat them in a best of 3. And then we also beat Envy, who was also decent. They had Kenny S at the time, and I forget who else, maybe Happy and all that in that era.
Sure.
We beat them. Those are 2 decent wins, I think. And then we went to Dreamhack Winter pretty much a week after that, I think. And this is not an excuse, but we were fully jet lagged. I don't know what happened for whatever reason, but me and Mixwell were rooming together, and we woke up at 4 a.m. every single night, and we were just like, we couldn't sleep. And that's a dumb excuse, but like we played the event, we played like shit. And honestly, our confidence was awful at that time. When we lost that, we're like, wow. Was that group stage a one-off? Like, are we actually like just shit? And we didn't even blame ourselves. We didn't blame jet lag. We're just like, man, that was brutal. Like, we should have like played better. We lost to Gambit and Cloud9, I think. Like, boom, boom, done. You know. And we were in Sweden for a week and a half or whatever, and just like for nothing basically. So we came back, and yeah, confidence was in the drain. But something happened, and a fire sparked in us in ELEAGUE playoffs. And I think after the first win, we kind of just kept going. Like first, I think it was Mouse Sports. We pretty much dominated them. So at that point, after that, our confidence was at an all-time high. Like it's funny how it changes so quick. You know, like group stage, like confidence up here at ELEAGUE, then go to Dreamhack Winter, and then come back and after one win, it's back up to here again. It's like that's kind of how Counter-Strike is. And you'll ask any pro, and a lot of Counter-Strike is just confidence based in general, like just not second guessing yourself and just playing with confidence. Yeah.
If people don't remember, in the final of that tournament when he played against Astralis, like, listen, this was the Kirby Astralis. It wasn't the one with Vegas, obviously, later. That was, like, the GOAT team. But this team already, you could tell, was really good because, like, they'd just been to, like, I think it was the ESL Pro League, and they were, like, you know, almost in the final. And they already looked, I think online, they'd had some massive streak of wins. In this tournament, obviously, they've already beaten fucking teams like SK Gaming, like, you know, like, top teams in the world to get to the final, right? If I'm being honest, the way the bracket was, their side of the bracket was supposed to be the hard side. Oh, yeah. And so, logically, whoever came out of that side was supposed to win this tournament. So I think even if other people might have liked your team on the other map, I'm pretty sure everyone in the final, except maybe NA fans, thought this is like the Astralis is going to win this easily. I remember even seeing the veto and being like, overpass third map, they're even really good on that. Like, this is easy. So, like, I don't know if anyone expected this final to go the way it did. What do you remember of this final? Like, because the epic thing to me is this isn't like the Boston Major. Like, the first 2 maps, yeah, back and forwards. The third map, you guys actually pretty convincingly handled them.
Yeah, it was like 69 or something. I think actually the second map, I remember exactly the scoreline. First map was 69 for them on Train, and that was like, man, like, yeah, they're just doing their thing, and we weren't that well drilled on Train, and we knew they were better than us. And then Cobble was our map, and it was 16-6. Like, we just slammed them. And then, yeah, an Overpass, it was 69 as well, and I'm sure you remember, like, the incredible, just, like, NAF pop-off. Like, NAF had, like, 35 frag, 40 maybe. It was plus 20 or something, you know, in the final map of a grand final. Like, I think he should have got the MVP based off that, but I guess I performed better in the group stage and like the quarterfinals, semis. But NAF literally won that event for us, like completely. So besides that, though, yeah, I agree. Astralis were the clear favorites, and we were just like, everyone expects us to lose. We're on a momentous run. We're the underdog. Just play like how we have been. Like, and no one will be upset. You know, that's what I said. Like, no one's expecting us to win this. And also, I do think we got not necessarily lucky with the Astralis, but I do think it would have been harder for us to play SK Gaming if they would have won, because we match up way worse versus them. So I was very happy when SK lost that series, because I'm not saying we would have lost the final, but it would have been much harder if we played them.
Right, one thing actually that this set off the trend for, if people have followed Stanislaw's career, is despite all, listen, there's plenty of flaws you can bring up about Stanislaw. I mean, he has had to be removed from his own teams many times, you know, but one thing he seems unusually good at is actually playing against Astralis. Like, if you look over all the teams he's in, this Team Liquid, going to the, obviously, EG/NRG, like, mate, the amount of wins this guy, put it this way, if people don't know, Nitro's probably played Astralis something mental, like 30 best of threes, and Stanislaw has way more wins against them. Like, it's actually ridiculous. This guy, he's like the kryptonite of the team. Do you have any reasons to why? I mean, obviously his style's like pretty heavy mid-rounding, right? But what would you say? What are the strengths of Stanislaw as a caller? What makes it work when it works?
I think sometimes he gets into a zen state of mid-round calling. Like, he'll just make the perfect read sometimes, and that like, we'll just go to a site and there's one guy there, or we'll go to a site and they stacked the other site. Like, he just has these moments, and I don't think it's as consistent as he would like it to be, but where he just makes basically the perfect reads. And that's why I think, because Astralis is one of those teams that's really hard to outbrain, because they have a lot of really smart players in their team, and they always have, and that's why you lose, because like they just kind of whittle away with you their utility, or they like perfectly stack a site. So when you can counter that to them, I think that's when you actually are able to like beat them. And I think I'm one of the players, maybe not to the extent of Stanislaw, but I've beat Astralis probably maybe same amount than when I played them, even in complexity and Cloud9. It was kind of like back and forth, but mainly they had the number on us. But I think like if I looked at my career a long time ago, or like a couple maybe 6 months ago, about like my stats for Astralis, and I was like pretty much even. I'm like, damn, actually that surprised me, because I always thought Astralis was just so hard to play against, you know.
Sure. One thing I wanted to ask about was, as you alluded to before, for some reason in Stanislaw's teams, they always come with this like tension that's outside of the game, like the idea that like he's argumentative, or he's stubborn, or obviously he's had issues with some of his coaches over the years. Like, could you explain what, like, without obviously like just dropping down and like, what I want to get a sense of is like, where's the issue in this regard? Like, is it that, for example, like, as you say, if you're someone where kind of like, you know, you're zoned in and you're just feeling the game or whatever, sometimes you're going to want people to kind of like, look, just leave me be. Like, I'm doing whatever I'm doing. Maybe I don't want to like, you know, do everything off the demo we studied, or maybe you want to just do it off field. Maybe I don't want to have to do a bunch of prep work. So was any of that involved? Like, what? Because this is what's weird. Normally, I've even said this to Stanislaw himself. I say, mate, to be an in-game leader, like the word leader is in there. You also have to sort of like win people over and make them want to do what you want to do. You know, if you're battling them and arguing with them, even if you're right, like it might not work. You know, they might just think fuck you. You know, so it's tricky in that dynamic. Certainly, I know in theory he's evolved and matured over the years. But what was this Stanislaw like? What was his issues? Do you think?
I think definitely was a sense of his way or the highway sometimes. But I don't think people really gave him that much arguments for that. People kind of just followed what he wanted to do, and we sometimes gave him flack. But generally speaking, we just did what he wanted. I think the problem wasn't even his fault, actually. Me and Neff and even Mixwell sometimes, we kind of got into like these weird arguments sometimes. I'm sure you've seen the famous clip of us arguing on Nuke.
Yes.
Like that happened, not to that extent, but sometimes. Like, and we're just like, me and Neff are like brothers, honestly. Like, we just argue, like, and we get over it. Like, that round, we got over it the next round. We were over it, but we didn't know that other people weren't. And that happened quite frequently because, example is, we won that minor wherever that clip happened. We won that map. That was the final. We won it. I noticed instantly that Stanislaw was pissed. He was not happy. Didn't talk to anyone the whole day. Wouldn't respond to anybody in WhatsApp when he was in his room alone. And eventually, he finally divulged to me that he was, like, a huge paragraph of, like, how he was really upset with how we maintained our mental state, and how me and Neff argued in the final. Like, we're never going to win versus good teams if we do that. Like, it's just not cool, and it really annoys him. And I actually think it's perfectly reasonable for him to be upset, but I think he has a problem expressing himself, and he likes to keep things inside. So we were really shocked at first, like, why he was mad, you know, and then it happened a lot in the team. And a lot of times we didn't know what was making him mad. And that's the only issue I had with him, is he didn't really tell people why he got upset. But what I found out later was it was because people didn't have the best mentalities in the team, and that was the main reason. Like, I'm almost 95% sure the main reason Stanislaw left the team was because of Neff. Back then, he had a very shit mentality, honestly, and I know he's gotten a lot better over time, but there were moments in the team where he kind of let us down in his mental state. And Stanislaw did not like that, and he wanted to cut Neff, and I did not want to cut Neff. No one else did. So basically, Stan took matters in his own hands and just left because he didn't want to be in that environment anymore. And it sounds bad, but from my perspective, the environment didn't feel bad at all. Same with Mixwell, and same with Neff, and same with tarik. The environment was fine. We just kind of like had our squabbles here and there, and we got over them. But for Stanislaw, it was like, this environment is awful, and it was eating away at him, and he couldn't play it anymore. And I understand it completely because everyone's different, and you don't know how they're feeling. So I do wish he gave us more of a heads up when he left, but I understand why he left.
So as you referenced earlier, you actually were awarded the MVP of this tournament. I mean, listen, it's also because, like, you know, it wasn't just the MVP for like the finals only, you know, because as you said, like the finals, obviously NAF was the X factor, but over the whole playoffs especially, I remember me and Moses were just like, it has to be NAF, it has to be Rush rather, because not only did your team have like some very good T sides, but like, even in this team, would it be fair to say you were playing like kind of hard entry, right? I actually remember you was just running out first every time.
On complexity, yeah, it was like different than
on that OpTic.
Okay. Yeah, it was basically me and tarik hard entering pretty much every time. Yeah, it was fun though. Honestly, it sounds weird people to say this, but I like entering. It's just like when you get that kill or get the entry, win the round for team, it feels incredible. And nothing really in CS compares to that. Maybe besides a clutch, you know, for example.
Right, obviously, listen, no one wants to say, like, their prime individually was, like, 5 years ago. It sounds depressing. But, like, this period, just individually, you were, like, very good, even relative to all the players in the world. Was this, like, your individual prime, do you think, OpTic?
I think OpTic and part of Cloud9, yeah. I think OpTic because I just didn't... I mean, I'm not saying I don't give a fuck now, but I just, like, didn't give a fuck. I just, you know, ran in every time, I had a higher sensitivity. I had really good roles in CT side, like rotation roles. So all the time, I was just flowing around, getting eco frags, getting, you know, 3Ks on gun rounds. Like, I just was living my best life basically in the roles because we had a very nice system in the team where people kind of got what they wanted and everyone was comfortable. No one was unhappy with their spots, and I got really good spots in that team. Besides entering, which I actually somehow did well even though I was entering. But yeah, I would say it definitely was my prime T-sided.
This is actually also, I remember the last year where people actually in most teams used to think of like entry as like a totally set role. Like this guy's always the entry, always goes for, because I remember like I was friends with people like Apex and even they were starting to get to the point where they were like, dude, this actually isn't a role. Like this is just like, I'm just being told to suicide half the game. And then
everyone
people tell me, you know, and then every fan tells me at the end of the game I suck because my stats are all shit. And it's like, this is the worst job ever. And I even remember thinking like, he is sort of right. Like at one point in time, it made sense that, you know, people set the team up like that. But even then they sort of went too far by making it like you do it every time. Like obviously in the modern day, it just depends like what side of the map you hit, what timing you hit, you know, in theory, yeah, a number of people can be the entry in that sense, right? In your career, not only this team were you very well known for doing that, but obviously, if we just very briefly skip forwards, in complexity, people would also say, like, part of what made Config get back his form was Rush was just a pure hard entry, ran in first. Like, do you actually think as a role it should be, like, shared more? Like, I mean, I can go both ways. Like, part of me thinks, listen, to be a specialist, you can sort of, like, have more experience doing it than other people and kind of know some tips and tricks and stuff. But how would you divide that up? Because obviously, like I say, like, even if it is a set role, it's always going to be one that you'd have to judge with like a lot of nuance, right? The stats are never going to tell you who's actually good at that role necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's a role that you have to be obviously willing to do, but it's not that necessarily hard of a role. It's more just a mental role, right? Obviously, there's players who might have lower sensitivity and worse movement, so they can't do it like, for example, entering on B, T-side Mirage. Like, you have to jump out the window and you have to hit a really good hop. B-hop, and if you don't hit that, you're just gonna like get stuck in the window, which I do sometimes, and you're just gonna die instantly, right? So if you have low sense and bad movement, you just can't do it. But I think you also have to have the mental ability to realize I might just die instantly with no damage at all. That might just happen, like no chance, and the round's over, or like hopefully your teammate trades. But I'm in the mentality that if I have players that I have like the utmost confidence in that will trade me and win the round for me, then I'll just go first every time, no matter what, because I had that confidence in my teammates in complexity. I knew that they were going to trade me. I knew that they were going to follow me up and kill like the next guy. Like Config was the entry fragger with me, but he was always the second guy in. So I knew that he was right behind me, and he's one of the best aimers in the world, in my opinion. Like maybe top 3, top 5. He's insane at his peak. Maybe not consistently, but at his peak, he is one of the best. And whenever I went, I just knew he was behind me, so it was fine. And I think it had been a while since I had been this like hardcore entry fragger, because we had a lot of set strats and we had a lot of defaults, but most like pretty much every set strat, I was the hard entry. And if I was on the site, say like I was on the side of the site on, I'll say Mirage again, we're 8 halls and there's 3 of us there on T side. If I'm in that halls, even if I'm in the back, I'm the one that's gonna like go past my teammates and be the first one in every single time, even if it delays it like a bit, because then I know that that's what they expect of me, but I also know that like the players need to shine in order to feel better, honestly, because they get the confidence from having better stats and getting more kills. And there was a problem in complexity with players who, like, if they weren't doing so well, they weren't feeling the greatest mentally. So I knew in my head that I got to give them that boost.
Fair enough. Right, back in this period where, as we talked about, like you won the E-League Season 2, Naf was in this amazing form in the final. I want to ask about him as a player, because obviously you played with him a number of years in a number of different teams. Right, back then, I normally get the sense that, like, I normally think I have a pretty good read on, like, who's good or who's going to become good, you know, because the eye test can show you a lot. I will say the eye test for him I thought was very misleading, dude, because I remember doing a deep dive right after this final, like, have I misjudged this player? Because everyone in the NA scene was always saying, like, oh, he's like a really skilled player. I mean, he was pretty young by then, to be fair, but even so, they were all kind of hyping him as like the next talent, right? And I remember when I did a deep dive and I went through all these POV demos, and I was watching like all the fucking, I remember thinking like, this is like the least consistent player ever, dude. Like, first of all, his movement style's the weirdest shit ever. Like, it generally looks like he is just like, in the game, he looks like he's lazy. Like, he's never fucking running, he's walking everywhere. Weird like timings on when to flank people and rotate. Then obviously his image style, like he does whatever he wants. Like, he picks up an AWP this round and a rifle. Like, he just looks as a player like, who the fuck is this player? So I'll genuinely say, I never would have ever expected he got to the level he would in Team Liquid, where he was like legit one of the best players in the world. Who the fuck is this guy?
He's just a guy who is so incredibly naturally talented. Like, Naf's not going to put a lot of time out of practice, straight up. That's just how it is, and that's how it's always been. But he's going to hop on and just dominate. Like, and then on top of that, his game sense, like the way he plays the game is just so natural as well. Like, the raw skill and the raw game sense put together makes him like an overall player who's always going to perform pretty much like under any circumstance. And that's why I think like he's one of the most consistent players these days, is because he just gets on and kills people and does it right. Like, and obviously he's not an entry fragger. He's more of like a lurker / like second guy or whatever type deal. I think he's a lurker these days, but he just gets good timings and he gets the kills he always needs to get. Like, I'm hard pressed to find a clip of Nap just whiffing. It just doesn't happen. Like, I've seen plenty of good players whiff. I've whiffed plenty of times and it happens, but Nap just is very, very consistent. And it's also his demeanor, I think it's changed a lot over time. Back in OpTic, he had a very like fragile demeanor where if some things went wrong, he might just instantly start tilting. But I think these days he kind of just gets in, does whatever, and just kills people. And he maintains the same like facial expressions the whole time, just staying calm the whole time. And I think there might be moments where he might tilt. I'm not sure because I haven't played with him for so long now. But I know that he is like only improved in the sense that his individual level, his mentality, and so like he kind of just improved on the player he was back in OpTic. Just, you know, he's just a better level now. And I always thought he was amazing. That's why I never wanted to cut him when Stanislaw wanted to cut him. Like, it was worth it for me to like get over the humps and the hurdles of his attitude to play with him, because I knew he could just like, for example, pick up an AWP and just ace, just do it, boom. And we had this thing called nap strats where Naf would randomly in a game, almost every time, whether a match or a scrim, just call out a strat, and it was 100% win rate. So we call them Nap strats because he always had a hard read on someone, like instantly, like we gotta do this and it's gonna work, and it always worked. I promise you.
And everyone knew if he calls it, you just do it.
Yeah, exactly. We always had a thing because Naf just knows the game.
Right, even though I referenced earlier that you had this one weird land, Dreamhack Winter, where it went bad, if I actually just take that out of the equation, I look at the rest of the pattern, you made the playoffs at the ESL Pro League, you won this Northern Arena tournament, yeah, you had the Dreamhack one, forget that for a second, you won ELEAGUE, you came second at ECS right afterwards, you qualified to the major, going into this major, the ELEAGUE Atlanta major, on paper, I don't care what anyone says, like, this team was like a top 5 team in the world. Like, this team was supposed to, you were supposed to be a minimum playoff team, right? A team potentially, I mean, people would say potentially a dark horse to win the whole tournament, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a lot of context on what happened in that
do it.
event. I'm not sure if it's ever been spoken about, but essentially, we were in a situation where it was really hard to get Mixwell's visa to work in the US. Okay. So he went home for the holidays after ECS, so mid-December, and ELEAGUE Major was early January. And we wanted to practice early January, so we could have 2 weeks of practice or more before the major. Something happened and he couldn't come. The visa process didn't finish, and he couldn't come to NA. until literally the tournament started. So we got basically zero practice with him in NA. Like we tried to go over some stuff in scrims and stuff in the servers, but we couldn't scrim because he had 150, 160 ping. It just wouldn't be nice for anybody. So yeah, we didn't play any scrims for the biggest event of our careers on this team at the time. And we knew that we could have been so good at this event if we would have just had practice. So it's no one's fault in particular. I think like if you could pin on anybody, it would be the OpTic J guy a long time ago. He used to work with OpTic, and I know there's some drama with him, but he just didn't really like. He wasn't on the ball with the visa at the time, and he kind of like brushed it off until last minute, and then it was like too late. So he can never come back until basically the event. And I think that if we had practice, I think a lot could have been different. I think we could have made a deep run. Stanislaw might have reconsidered because at that time he was talking to Liquid, and we obviously bombed out 1-3 in the group stage. I always think back to like that time and what could have been different if Oscar had been in North America and we had been practicing diligently. Because I know we were all down, and this is a terrible excuse to not play Counter-Strike, but I know like we were all down that Oscar couldn't be with us. A lot of us didn't even play that much Counter-Strike, and it was just a depressing time for us. And at this time, I got the offer from Liquid too, and I was considering it, but I'm just like, it's not worth it because we have such high potential in this team. Because that was when Oscar couldn't come back to America, and I was like, what's happening with this team? But little did I know that Stanislaw had accepted that offer without telling anybody.
I'll also say as well, because I always think it's important to put like the context of a result in. This is an example of someone not making the playoffs of a major, where no joke, like this is like some nightmare fuel shit for that format back then. Because this is when we had Swiss system, but it was purely random as to which one of the people in that class of wins you got. And you basically are the ultimate example of a team where you just got the worst roll of the dice each time, as it were. Because if people don't know, the first match you had, because remember, the seeding used to be based back then, unfortunately, on past majors, so it didn't matter that you'd had all this ELEAGUE success. You were basically treated as like, random teams. So you start out, you had to play against Virtus.pro. Well, obviously Virtus.pro is one of the best teams in the entire world at the time, and in fact they almost won this event. Right after that, you play against Astralis. Spoiler, they did win this event and actually were ranked number 1 in the world at the time. So already right off the bat, you've played basically like, I'm going to say like number 1 and number 2 in the world, if not at least top 3 teams. Right after that, you beat Flipside, and then listen, the one that's not so great is you did lose to Godsent.
No,
but even then, look,
awful,
look, Godsent isn't good, but I will say they did have a core of players that had won like 3 majors. So like, it's not that they were total scrubs either. Like that, this is a ridiculous run, dude. Like that's almost like if you'd have actually even just got out of the group stage, that's like the level of difficulty is you'd have to be good enough to win the event almost.
Yeah, we needed to be our best, and even like playing Godsent, like they played really well, but also like I could tell like we were just so off individually, so off sync, like nothing was going well. Even versus Flipside, we almost lost to Flipside. We were 16-13. The closest game, in my opinion, was Virtus.pro. I think it was 16-14 on Cobble, and that could have easily given us a 1-0, a confidence boost, So definitely got bad draws, but I do think we had plenty of chances to make it out of that group, but we just didn't have the good structure going into it. It just really sucked.
Right, I obviously do want to talk about this whole Stanislaw situation that happened here, because here's the thing, even when you guys, I'll do air quotes, bombed, because even though the result is a bomb, like I said, if you put the context in, it's really not as bad as people think, and if you know the thing you just mentioned about the visa, it all becomes more and more and more reasonable, like, you can see how it could happen, put it that way. With that said, right, as much as, yeah, it was shocking, dude, I remember thinking, like, yeah, it's no problem, like, listen, after the past results, you just run this back, you go to the next tournament, who gives it, in fact, you just say all the shit I just said, you say, who gives a fuck, we got a bad draw, whatever, we're going to win the next one, So the idea that out of nowhere, Stanislaw just leaves, goes to a rival team, and you're basically just left without the IGL. Like you said here, he was already talking to them. What was even the pretext, though? Because aside from this result and maybe fucking up the visa thing, wasn't he enjoying it in OpTic? Wasn't it a great team? Like, to a lot of people, I know the Liquid offer was attractive. They had good players as well. But this is crazy when you consider, like, winning massive tournaments, then leaving a few months later. Can you give me some of your thoughts, like, how it happened? I mean, you've given some of the context, but was it still shocking to you when he left?
It was a little shocking, but I kind of saw it coming to a certain extent because initially Liquid asked me and Stan to join. And I said no, and I wasn't sure what Stan was doing. And then after the major, he kind of told me, like, hey, man, it's Liquid offer, like, we should both go and do it. And I'm like, why? Like, we have such a good thing going. And then I realized it was mainly because of his disagreements with NAF on the team. He just, at that point in time, I don't know how it is now with them, but at that point in time, they didn't get along in game that well. Just it wasn't nice for them to play each other. So one of them had to go, I think, for the team to work and eventually. And I guess Stan was the one to go. I think that it was. Everyone thinks it was a mistake, but I do think it was the right choice for him at the time because it would have eaten away at him over time that he didn't want to be in this team, and it would have gotten worse and worse. So it just like one of those things that from outside looking in looks like, why would you do that? But from inside looking out, it's like it was probably the best thing Stan could have done for himself in his career. Not that he did big things with Liquid, but just for his mentality and his overall well-being mentally, you know?
Right. What's interesting is you referenced there that you had the offer as well, like Liquid was going to get you. If people don't know, even though they had a bunch of talent in that team, right after this I noticed like this is one of those stories that was like a report and then it just disappeared. I know Hex, so I know this is a real story. Right after this as well, a few months later, was where they tried to get 2 or more OpTic players. I think it was Mixwell and someone else. Was it Mixwell and who?
It was me and Mix. It was me and Mixwell.
You and Mixwell.
Again, it was again. Yes. Like that was further down. That was like 4 or 5 months down the line.
And wasn't it something ridiculous though? Like you basically were like you were all but gone. Like you degreed, and then Hex sort of had to be like, "Whoa, what the fuck's going on here?" Like almost like bring people into a room. Like we're not leaving this room until you stay in OpTic. Wasn't it something ridiculous like this?
I think it was. I told Hex everything. I was very like cordial with him. I'm like, "Hey man, like the team. This is when we had all the stand-ins, you know, with Hayes and Jason R. Love those guys, but it wasn't working out on the team." And I'm just like, "Hey, listen, man, I have a lucrative offer for me and Oscar to join a really good team, stable team. I love you to death, but like it has to be done for the betterment of our careers." And he's like, "You know, you're right. Like you're right. You should do it. I mean, I don't want you to leave. I think we can make it work. If you stay, it's gonna work over time. Trust the process type thing." He didn't say that exactly, but that's kind of what he was saying. I'm like, I know I've tried for the last couple of months, and it's just not working. So I was basically all in on Liquid. And I told Oscar, like, we should do this. He's like, yeah, I agree. We should do this. And then Hex got to Oscar. He's like, he reached out to him and talked to him for a while. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he basically convinced Oscar that it was in the best interest for us to stay in OpTic because for our careers long term, for just players in the future, we were getting a big investment from that Infinity play. You know what? Remember they got bought out like mid 2017 OpTic? Yeah. They were getting, we couldn't afford players back then. That's why we kept playing with stand-ins. They didn't have a big budget. But they said, come this summertime, they're going to have a big budget for buyouts. And nice. I think it was true. They got bought out eventually. I'm not sure when it was. But they said, you got to stick it out. And eventually we can buy players. And that's what kind of convinced Oscar to stay. And at that point, I'm like, if I'm not going to look, because they asked me to join as well, just alone. But I'm like, at that point, I kind of want to stay with my friend Oscar and with the org. I just like, I'll stick it out because it was too much of a risk to me to join Liquid alone because they were a good team, but they weren't a sick team back then, you know?
Yes.
And I thought that we could have been a sick team if we bought Mixwell. But if it's just me, I'm like, it might not work out. So I'm like, I'm just going to stay with the team and see what happens, basically. And I guess eventually it didn't end up working out, but still.
As you referenced, this was the era where when Stanislaw left, it wasn't even like you got to have like, right, here's the new OpTic, and it was just stand-ins over and over again. And as you alluded to with the people, I mean, it makes sense now that you say you had no money. These weren't like quality players who should have been in that position. Like, they were people like, it's cool, they could stand in, but like, it was obviously a temporary deal. I mean, who knows? Maybe Jason had the skill, but he'd never been a top pro, like, you didn't have the experience. So I have to say, when you look at this run, it's actually, dude, this is one of those results, this period that I really want to actually ask about, because normally in Counter-Strike, it can be a very weird game. Sometimes you have teams like Astralis has done this a bunch of times where you take like a stand-in, sometimes even instead of your best player, but somehow it's still fine. You're still really good, you know, or you have like a honeymoon period and for that, you know, that week or whatever, everything's great. This team on paper had all these really good players. You only lost Stanislaw, but it didn't matter like, who the stand-in was. Like, this team was terrible, dude. You had like one result. I remember it was like Cologne, they made the playoffs. Like, aside from that, these were depressing. Like, you would go to tournaments and you would just be at a complete also run. Like, you had no chance whatsoever. What was this period actually like? Like, how do you mentally keep it together in Snarks? I know this is actually, I remember when you started to on Twitter kind of be like, kind of a bit down on yourself and kind of be like, where the fuck's the old Rush? Like, I'm in shit form. Like, the team's got. It sounded like it was a depressing environment.
I mean, I've said it numerous times, but I play good in a team that has a good structure, a good environment, stability, and this is the exact opposite of all of that because we were changing our IGLs out consistently. We were changing the structure consistently. We were changing players consistently. So I was always like changing what I was doing every single like other week, basically. So yeah, individually, I sucked, and most other people on the team sucked too because we were just losing. Like no one can play that well really if you're just losing nonstop. Because we were still going to big events. We were qualifying for ESL Pro League, all these other events like I Am Sydney. I don't know if we got invited or what, but we were still making these lands, like winning in North American leagues. You know, like the standings. We were still making them, but like barely. And yeah, we played with who did we play? First, we had Hayes as a coach. With Jason R as a player, I think. No, sorry. We had Hiko, I think, first at the Dreamhack Masters Vegas. And it just didn't feel like the right fit at the time. We tried to get him to call. I don't think he was very used to it and just didn't feel like a really good fit. Maybe we should have just went with that and kept it going, you know. And we also had Peacemaker as a coach, I think, at that time. Was that before, maybe? I don't remember. We had Peacemaker for a bit, for like one event, I think. I think it was I Am Katowice we had him. And then I think we got Jason R. I'm probably missing people. We had Jason R with Hayes the coach. And then eventually Jason R left. And then we got Hayes from the coach to a player. And he played. And that's when we made ESL Cologne. That was actually insane because at that time the team was kind of falling apart. And we were deciding, like, well, maybe we should go our separate ways, you know, because it's not working out. We've tried for so long. And then all of a sudden we make playoffs to the biggest stage of all of CS, right? And we like I don't think we almost beat, but we beat SK in the first map on the quarterfinals in Cologne in front of the crowd, and that was like, even though I've had so many big moments in my career, that was actually an insane moment because we were such a huge underdog, and I was like, no one expected us to do anything.
Of course not. They were far away number one. Yeah.
They're like, wait, they beat SK in the first map. What's happening? Like, what's going on here? And the crowd was like way behind us, like on our side this whole time, and it was awesome. But yeah, we lost the BO3 because we were shit at the time. But that kind of like turned our heads like, maybe we can actually get another player and put Hayes back to coach and actually do something with his team. But it obviously fizzled out after the Krakow minor or major qualifier. But I think overall that time frame was definitely very depressing, and believe it or not, I've had even more depressing moments in like my career. I'm sure you know, but that time it was only like 6-7 months, but it felt like a year to me.
Right. This video was kindly supported by Chris with a K, Lager15, Matt Pugnatio Ragkula, Shenlong, Travis Goff, Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zach Smid, Adam Oaks, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Chris, Eric Hillestad, Hades, J Dobbs, Jensen Gore, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsberg, Kovacevic, Tobias Bernasconi, Zumba, Zyrathenia, and a special thanks goes out to both Jerky's Minion and Joshua Gardner. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask one of those questions for my video AMA. Do you want teasers? Find out who the guests are for my upcoming shows. Maybe you even want to be a nerd having a long 2 or 3 hour discussion with me about anything on one of those video discussions. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.